will the Taliban regime realize that they have undermined support from the rest of the world by the very repressive practices they have resumed, really, because this is really very similar to the way they acted when they had power in the late 1990s. Beyond that, will the extremist threat that is present there, without question, that represented by the Islamic State, which is fighting against the Taliban, and that which is represented by Al-Qaeda, which is more of an ally to the Taliban, witness Zawahiri living just a few blocks from the presidential palace when he was brought to justice. Do these extremist elements begin to pose an international threat, similar to, say, the threat that was posed by the Islamic State when it established its caliphate in northern Iraq and northeastern Syria? Beyond that, what about the sheer humanitarian tragedy that is modern day Afghanistan, the starvation, the malnourishment, the lack of economic opportunity? The only growth industry in Afghanistan right now is the opium industry, and that now the arrival of methamphetamine production. And then does the United States finally begin to meet its moral obligation to the more than 160,000 Afghans and family members, those Afghans who qualify for a special immigrant visa, but have not been brought to the United States in accordance with the policy on that visa?
Well, there are many important issues to watch over the next few years. First is a Taliban close ties in their relationship with the other transnational terrorist groups and their finances, how they finance their regime if the money is not flowed from other sources. That's one area. And the second area is their attitude, policies, and behaviors toward the women, girls, and progressive and intellectuals of society. And the third is how they provide resources to the needy and to the most vulnerable segment of society.
When we're looking at both the Taliban's promises on human rights and the US's responsibilities to Afghanistan, and when we talk about hunger, we know that it's a complex crisis, but it's a humanitarian crisis with underlying economic issues. And part of those economic issues are driven by the crippling of the banking sector and the seizing of Afghanistan's foreign reserves. So the central bank doesn't function in the way that it should. There's a cash shortage, which may be getting better. But ultimately, this is a crisis. The humanitarian crisis is driven by the economic crisis. And what we want to look for are ways that the US and other countries are going to be able to help ease that crisis, and how discussions will go for releasing those central bank reserves back into the economy and getting banking going, which is a necessary part of the recovery for Afghanistan. One
is going to be really what happens with the leadership, what happens with this rather, well, we'll put it mildly, strange, with obvious limitations, leadership structure that I described at the beginning. By definition, I'm bound to feel that that looks vulnerable, even if it has survived really quite effectively for the first year. And then the second one really is the attitude of the international community and how the international community is going to respond to the situation we've been describing. Because of course, the basic and obvious, very clear initial response from the international community, or particularly the Western sort of the community, the liberal democratic community, has been sort of sanctions and cutting off cooperation and doing everything possible to ensure that Taliban leadership, Taliban resources, Taliban abuses and so on are in no way facilitated by international community, and particularly liberal democratic society support. And okay, well, that's fine, but there are so many perfectly rational arguments for saying, well, okay, but that's not helping the people of Afghanistan, if that just carries on being the attitude of the wider international community, and it's certainly not necessarily helping all the vulnerable people in Afghanistan, both in terms of poverty, in terms of jobs, and of course, above all, in terms of the position of women.
In my opinion, the international community should take an action and prevent the spread of terrorism in Afghanistan in order to prevent this great threat to the region and the whole world. And then seek a legitimate and inclusive government consisting of people of all ethnic groups to ensure women's rights, human rights, and security. Also, sanction against countries that they support terrorism today.
To me, our new generation, I've seen them fight against everything that's been happening with a strength that I could never imagine anyone else having. I lived back home for 18 years of my life, and I saw our new generation working hard, facing challenges no one else would have dared to, and dreamed of building our country, rebuilding a country, and not only our country, the whole world. I saw them wanting to be astronauts, scientists, and whatnot. And for me, our next generation, I believe, is going to change not only our country, but hopefully the whole world.